You're listening to Green Rapids.
Hi, we're back.
Welcome back. I don't know how excited I am to talk about this.
It needs to be done.
It needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
MPSC, we are coming for you.
In a nice way.
In a nice way. We're not going to hurt you or anything.
We're just telling people what you are, so you can't be sneaky.
You can't be sneaky anymore. And we need to be informed.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know who the Michigan Public Service Commission was before I started working in climate justice.
Literally had no idea that was a thing.
Yeah, well, it is. And they're the ones who are saying, yes, DTE, you can charge more. They are the ones who approve things like large-scale projects for utilities, land use, things like that. So we're going to explain a little bit more.
Do we want to start off with our
are.
experience with MPSC?
Yeah, we could. Yeah.
Yesterday,
Yeah. Yesterday. So by the time you hear this, won't be yesterday, but yesterday.
Erica and I went to an MPSC hearing here in Grand Rapids.
They're
And
typically held in Lansing.
typically, yes. But every so often there's also have like satellite ones for people in the community to be able to get to them. Let's back up for 1 second. MPSC stands for, and I think we've mentioned this in previous episodes, but in case you forgot, because it's okay, because we use so many acronyms. MPSC is the Michigan Public Service Utility.
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
She's so close, though.
Correct,
Go ahead.
right?
You know, okay, Michigan Public Service Commission.
That's what it is.
But she said utility because they are largely in charge of our utilities.
And I was looking at my notes and said utility. But anyway.
Michigan Public Service Commission, MPSC.
Not you.
And they were here in Grand Rapids to do a public hearing. So essentially what they're supposed to do is take comment from public, and they can't do that all over the state all the time, but they are required to get a count from people in different areas. And yesterday they came to Grand Rapids. And so, yeah, how would you describe that meeting?
Sparsely attended.
Maybe 20, at most 20 people,
At most.
right? And this room was set up for like 60. So
I feel like I set up for like 100, but yeah.
it probably was.
So we went to this meeting to give public comment. I was wearing my MLCV hat, the Michigan League of Conservation Voters, and we collaborate on some stuff.
Yeah.
But we went in, I just gave kind of public comments about general stuff. Like, I didn't know that I necessarily had like a deep like ask, but more so just like a reminder to invest more in clean jobs and like shifting away from fossil fuels, like, the classic shizzle. You had like an actual more pointed message though.
Yeah. But before we talk about the messages, really what I would like to kind of talk about is the experience of being there. And, from what I observed, most of the people who were there were older people. A lot of white people were there.
Were we other than one of the commissioners who happens to be Latina, I think we were the only two brown people.
There was one brown man sitting behind us.
I missed him.
Yeah.
Sad.
Sorry. He was behind us. But, so it was not well attended, not very diverse. And a handful of people who did showed up to make comments about their personal land that was going to be impacted. So to me, there wasn't like a huge space for engagement. Not that it wasn't, I would say the door was not necessarily opened, but it wasn't closed. Or it was kind of like the screen door was open.
Yeah.
The other door is open and you kind of feel comfortable going in, but like maybe you would still knock.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the vibe it was giving too. The meeting just started, and they started this like very formal process. But there was no explanation as to what they were voting on. Yeah, so they would talk about like, we have this specific thing that we're going to vote on, and it was like a number and letter code of a bill. Like, here, you have an example of it.
Yeah, and the layperson wouldn't know. So, for example, they would approve things like approval of order U-21744. in the matter of the application of True Connect Communications, Inc., for designation as an eligible telecommunications carrier in the state of Michigan, parentheses, final order. And then they make a motion to vote on it, and then they vote on it, and the order passes. And for, all these passed. There wasn't a single one that did not.
And so from an outsider's perspective,
You're
right?
like, what the frick is going on?
What does that mean? What does any of what you just said mean? And then also, I understand that there's at some point I'm not going to maybe understand a coding. I'm not going to understand all the language that somebody uses in their professional space, their expertise. But this is supposed to be a public hearing for people to be able to voice their opinions. How am I supposed to voice my opinion on something I don't understand?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of like technical jargon. Like, for example, there's one that's like, in the matter of the application of DTE Electric Company for approval of rate schedule D13XL high load factor rate.
Like, what does that mean?
What did you get from that?
That DTE is asking for money.
Exactly, but
Again.
we don't know. But we don't know like for what. We
Right.
don't know like how much. We don't know like,
what neighborhood
anything.
is that going to impact? Like, is this going to impact rates? Like, there isn't really context there. And then just one more thing from my perspective was they were all in unanimous decision making. There was not a space where someone was willing to explain their challenge on something. And yeah, so I don't want to get any further because part of like what I have to say for the comment portion is it was in my speech, but I could just say right now, this is not a space for discussion. This is a space for them to, it's a one-sided conversation. You know, it's the type of conversation where like, I'll explain my side and then I'm going to say what I have to say. And then the conversation is done, right? Like it doesn't leave space for you to feel like you're being heard. They're taking notes while you're saying what you're saying, but otherwise there's no response.
Yeah.
Right? You do leave with a very empty feeling.
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah.
my personal perspective.
That's really true. And I think part of it too is like I feel like sometimes it would be hard for people to make very like impactful public comment when the things on the agenda aren't even put out in like accessible language, like I said before. But also like even getting the agenda, you would have to do so much research to figure out like what on earth they're talking about, like who they're
Totally.
talking about.
Who has time for that?
It's rough. And that's why a lot of times people actually have to engage lawyers to deal with the public, the MPSC. Because
And who has money for that?
DTE and consumers' energy.
So really, we often, I think what I felt was out of place. And I was really bummed out that the room wasn't more full, which is another part of my comment. If you read in the description of what the Michigan Public Service Commission is set out to do in these meetings, is to, they're supposed to reach BIPOC and lower income communities so that they can hear them express themselves. So like, where was the general mailer sent to Grand Rapids residents that they were going to be here?
Yeah. I mean, we only heard about it because we work in this stuff.
Exactly.
And we're like in all the right email lists and things like that.
And
but if I was a layperson, I wouldn't know, A, that this was happening.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's B, right? Because A is I don't know who the MPSC is. B, I don't know what's happening. Like C, I don't know what they're saying or how it would impact me.
People generally don't know how long they have to speak, what is protocol, all of those things. And we have a city of almost 200,000 people, and there was not even 20 people in that room.
Even the ones that were there, like the ones that you mentioned in the beginning that were asking the MPSC to, it's not like, I don't remember exactly, but it was like a Centennial Farm, so I'm guessing it was like
It was not in Grand
rural.
Rapids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there was like this whole family, and they all gave testimony as to how these power lines would like, ruin their Centennial Farm forever and ever, which could be valid. But nobody from the city proper was there. And other than Erica and I being there for work, basically, there wasn't necessarily a lot of like BIPOC representation either.
Yeah. So I think it's easy to be intimidated walking into a space like that where you literally, I was intimidated. I had no idea what was going on. My heart was racing before. So yeah, that was a little bit of my experience. I do want for us to maybe give a little bit of education is to like the MPSC. How is it formed? Who sits on there? How do they get those positions? Those types of things.
You know, I'm your info girl.
Yeah. Well, we
I'm your
know
info girl.
from the conversation we had about the history of energy in Michigan.
Yeah, we mentioned it there. Yep.
Michigan Public Service Commission, like many public service commissions, are formed to be some form of regulatory process
Yes.
toward our utilities and in the things that we need from day to day, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So what more can we say for people to like grasp how they're formed,
Yeah.
what they do, how people get into seats to be a commissioner?
Yes. I'll start with the square one. What is a utility? So most of us kind of, until we're camping, we don't really realize like how many things are just like provided.
It's so true.
I'm okay. Maybe I'm speaking from a place of privilege. Until you get the bill in the mail, you probably don't really know like what you're kind of dealing with when it comes to utilities. But basically, utilities are things like, a utility is a business organization performing a public service, and it is subject to special governmental regulation. So public service is usually designated as gas, internet or telephone connectivity, electricity, and water kind of top four. But like trash pickup is also a utility too.
Yeah, like sewer would also be a public utility.
Yeah.
Okay.
So some of them are designated monopolies, and by designated we mean that, say for example, there was like, again, like kind of like how we talked about in our history of DTE and stuff here. If we had like 5 different utility companies and they each had their own set of wires, it would be a wreck, right?
Oh yeah, that was a huge part of the reason why they were like, okay,
Yeah.
who's doing what?
Yes. So designated monopoly means that a lot of times these places were allowed to have like one set of cables, and like that's the monopoly, right? That way, and also like, you know, even with things like natural gas, water, etc., it helps for us not to have like 5 different pipelines running underneath our feet.
Absolutely,
At all
it
times.
cuts down the confusion, right?
And so these, and then there's some that are also, some that are like private owned, like for example DTE and Consumers Energy, which guarantee profits to their investors. And then most, actually there's actually a lot of them that are municipal or how do you say, like publicly owned, I guess, or co-ops. And out of these, there's only a few that are regulated, which would be gas, electric, and water. Some that are not regulated are trash and internet or phone service. So these structures and regulations vary per state.
Okay.
For Michigan, we have 3, it could be between 3 and like 21, but 3 is generally the minimum. We have 3 public service commissioners, and they're appointed by the governor. So these are staggered out, so there's not like a full turnover every time. But the terms generally last 6 years, which is a really long time. I think that is longer than the government.
That's what we were talking about. Let me just see.
Yeah, check how long a governor's term is. So the governor appoints the chair of the commission too, and the chair is a person that's in charge of doing a lot of the administrative stuff for the commission. They're the ones that facilitate the meetings, maybe create and
4 years.
do the agenda. 4 years for governor, yeah. So, yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Their term outlives our governor's terms.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But they are appointed by the current governor. I kind of, one part I do like about that is that they are allowed to live through the ideas. So like, say you get into office and you appoint this commission, and then another governor is in that seat, they still have 2 more years to fulfill the work that they were going to do, and so they can stay on theme in that sense. Like a lot of people will say like presidents can't do anything in 4 years. Like you have to have 2 full terms to really like make a difference. So like I think that 6 years kind of rounds things off, and then also like avoids,
especially with the staggering.
Well, like say we got a very conservative governor as our next one, but we still had like maybe a little bit more progressive people on this commission. So that could be a way that could combat that.
Exactly.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. Okay, so as far as our previous commission, I'm going to read a little bit off the brochure that I got from them yesterday. It says the roots of the commission go back to the late 1800s when its predecessor was created to regulate the rates of railroad companies. Today, the commission regulates investor-owned utility companies (parentheses electric and natural gas) that operate in Michigan, setting the rates, terms of service, and the operational standards that utilities must meet. The commission is also responsible for pipeline safety and permitting requests and has limited oversight of the telecommunications issues. The commission makes decisions through the orders it issues at its commission meetings. Members of the public are interested in matters before the commission are encouraged to follow these issues on our website and may submit verbal comments during the commission meetings or written comments at any time. When sending in written comments, please be sure to include the case number, yada yada. But basically, they've been around for a really long time, and they're there to manage public utilities. So I feel like one of the common misconceptions is that they're there to protect the public, and I just learned this recently too, but apparently it varies on like the specific like purposes that each commission was built for. So again, each state looks a little bit different. In Michigan, I'm not sure exactly what the point is there, but I'm pretty sure that for our commission, they're supposed to have a what they call quote unquote balance of interest, in which not only are they protecting like the public's interest, but also the financial health of these utility companies.
So a couple of things I want to add to that is a company that is offering a utility also has to guarantee return to their stakeholders, meaning if they don't make a large profit year after year, taxpayers are supposed to take care of the in-between. Like they have like a guarantee that they will get a return on their investment, which is conflict of interest if you ask me. But then the other bit is in our episode where we talk about this, we're probably going to keep referencing this, but most public service commissions were formed by the actual individual, the corporations themselves.
Yeah.
So they formed a public service commission so they could say, if we don't start this regulation with our set of terms, somebody else is going to set one with their own.
Yeah.
And so we want to be the ones to kind of be in control of the standard. And that's why their interest has to be split, because this is created by people who are avoiding regulation, essentially.
That is a very important point. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of utility money, corporate money that goes into influencing these commissions.
Absolutely.
Like so much. And a lot of these laws and regulations and all these protections that were put in place, the majority of them were written with heavy, heavy, heavy influence from utility companies.
Yeah.
So as it is, it's like already like kind of skewy, you know, which is skewy, which is kind of a bummer. But let's see, I won't go into the 3 types of utilities that we have, but I would like to share just like an interesting fact that is in this webinar, which I'll share towards the end. But there's this map online of these counties that are served by United States utilities and what type of ownership they have. And this map is from 2017, so it could be a little bit different now, but not too much. So we see this map, and in this map you can see that there's the first part is like blue, and it's got like a pretty decent amount of coverage. I want to say like 80% coverage of a map of the United States, and those are investor-owned utilities. They serve 110 million customers collectively, and the amount of companies is 168. So, you know, it's just like a small amount of like individual entities, but they have this massive service area, right?
Well,
monopolizing.
Not only monopolize, but we talked about this. Do we have a choice? Like when you move into a house in Grand Rapids, Consumers is going to be your energy provider. DT is going to be providing your gas. And we don't have the ability for community-owned utilities. You have to be able to put solar on your roof in order to be able to control those types of things. So customers or cornered market.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of gross. On the other hand, we see that so keep the number, 168 entities to 110 million customers. Now, secondly, we see a map that has, I want to say, like 70 to 60% coverage, maybe 60, high 60s, in green. And that is cooperative owned energy. For that one, there are 812 entities that are serving customers. But as opposed to like the 110 million that are being served by investor owned, there's only 20 million that are being served by these cooperatives.
Okay.
And that one's a little bit tricky because, like, I think you mentioned this earlier, but cooperatives can be investor owned also.
Yeah, right.
So there's like a little bit of like a gray area
Well,
there.
because a co-op is people who invest in them, right? So they have to be kind of hand in hand. Okay.
And then as far as like publicly owned or like, what we think of as like municipally owned utility companies, there's 1,958. Do you think they would serve entities? 1,958. Do you think they would serve more or less customers than the 168 investor owned?
Obviously, you would assume more.
Only because of the way I'm saying it, probably.
Well, no, you
would assume more because it's like a bigger
it's a higher
number of entities.
Right.
Yeah. But they actually serve only 24 million customers.
Yeah. So we are cornered.
We're cornered.
We are completely monopolized.
Yeah, and if you guys want to see this map, there's a video, a webinar on YouTube called Public Utility Commissions 101 with Tanya Pazlowski and Midwest BDC. Highly recommend. It goes way more into depth than what we're gonna do in this episode. But I just thought that was really interesting because there are a lot of small public utility companies, but they just have like a smaller customer base, and they're usually because people start them in their own neighborhoods if they're like FU investor owned.
Well, they're community, right? This is not like a citywide thing. Usually these initiatives are within like a certain neighborhood.
Yeah, like it might be a county or it might be like a microgrid, like in a neighborhood. Sometimes like
an association.
Yeah, or like is this like Holland that kind of have recently kind of got their own power plant.
Yeah, Holland uses BPW. Actually, they have since it's not very recent. I was a kid. I remember seeing BPW because I grew up in Holland.
Nice.
Woo, woo.
Wait, what does the B stand for?
If I know.
Building of Public Works. I don't know.
Maybe. But we can look it up actually right now. But Holland does some pretty dope stuff with their energy.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's Board of Public Works.
There we go. Yeah, so some places make their own, which is amazing. And I think we need more of that.
Absolutely.
All right, so I feel like where we see a lot of the main role of the MPSC here in Michigan is that generally speaking, there's a few things, like the way they split up who gets to say what depends on like where that energy is in the process.
Okay.
So when it comes to the generation, aka the creation of energy, whether it be through coal or so-called natural gas or solar or wind, etc., all that is generation, like the creation of power.
Okay.
That is actually under the federal government's scope of like jurisdiction. As is a transmission, which is not like what gets it from like the little power lines to our house, but like those giant lines that are transporting like power across the state.
Okay. Yeah.
Those are federally owned. And that's what we could think of as like wholesale power.
Okay.
It's like huge volumes, right? That's federal. What's under the state, in this case, like the Public Utility Commission's power, is the distribution and the end user effect. So distribution is more so like, because usually it's like really high voltage when it's in the distribution cable or transmission cable. And in the distribution, they dial it down to like, smaller amounts of power that aren't going to like blow up your house and like overload it, right?
Right.
So these distribution cables and the end user, which is like, what you use in your actual house, is what's under the scope of the MPSC. So that's kind of like, depending on what issues you have, that's kind of what that kind of designates whether you're going to go to federal or state.
Okay. Yeah.
So like I said, I think up at the top, most public utility service commissions are established in statute, which means that they're actually written into laws. So every time one of these gets created, it gets written into state law or federal law, depending on what's appropriate. For the most part, there's only 11 states vote or like elect their like their
Well, yeah, that's what I figured
commissioners.
we were going to talk about. So, like,
Yeah.
how do they get into these positions?
They're appointed by the governor here in Michigan.
Right.
Actually, in most states, they're governor appointed. But the fact that it's only in 11 states you can
Yeah.
vote in your own public utility commissioners, like that blew my mind. That's so little.
It does blow my mind, but also, like, how would you know who to vote for? Right? Like, people don't really have that.
We
Like,
vote for a drain commissioner even though we don't really know
Yeah,
what that
well,
is.
it wouldn't make a difference to me.
Mhm.
It literally, the names on that page don't make a difference, and we typically do it by name recognition.
That's true.
So I think that can be kind of like, I don't know that this is necessarily something I want to have to vote on as much as this is something that I want to have a better understanding from my elected officials
Right.
from.
Yeah.
Like, I do wish that it was more of a point for our governor to be like, this is the Michigan Public Service Commission.
Mhm.
I'm working very closely with them.
Mhm.
Like give credit to them and then also take credit for their actions because
Yeah.
you put them in that position,
Mhm.
and then I can better understand how they're connected to the
That's so
decisions that are
true.
being made for me.
Yeah, because sometimes those dots just don't get connected.
Girl, you assume that everything that's done within legislation is like your elected officials.
Mm-hmm.
But like the Clean Energy Act or Clean Energy Jobs Act,
Mm-hmm.
that's something that's impacting the Michigan Public Service Commission.
Mm-hmm. What a mouthful.
Like, yeah, right. I know. But that was part of the reason why we were there yesterday too, right? To talk about clean energy and to talk about, job transitions. And we're talking to people that we don't even really know. We don't know anything about them because they are appointed,
Yeah.
So it's weird blend of like, I'm okay with not knowing who. Okay, well, we know Dan Scripps because his name comes up a lot in like emails, but like Catherine Piertrick,
Mm-hmm.
Alyssa Carrion,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who they are, and if I
Yeah.
saw their names, I wouldn't know to vote for them.
Yeah,
It's just more research for people to do,
exactly.
and more confusion,
Which is good or bad, right? And like that, we can say that that's like a failing of like our civics education. Because what if we did know what these people are and what they did? What if I learned what a drain
Absolutely.
commissioner does in school?
Well, we just had in a different conversation, but like we were just talking about like what if we literally were taught these things like recycling, like plants and how they're connected to the human existence.
Yes.
What if we were taught those things in school and it was just second nature to know who the Michigan Public Service Commission was?
You're like, yeah, I know the guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Or like at least know of him, right? And
I
not
know
have everything
what
be like-
decisions he gets to make on my behalf.
Yeah, and like I feel like because especially here we put so much focus on who the president is that we
totally.
don't, and like he's just at the end of the day he's just one out of hundreds of people in our government. Hundreds.
Thousands of people. When
Probably,
you really
yeah,
think of
probably
all
thousands.
houses, I mean, what, in Congress, how many people are there? Over
That's true.
200?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So-
and then if you trickle that down to like, I guess if you trickle it down to like county level and stuff, that's probably like thousands and thousands of people. Yeah, like, and that's all part of our government, and I wish we would just know more about how all these pieces fit together. But so I guess since you were talking about who they are, we do have 3 currently. Again, they're all appointed by the governor. The chair currently is this guy named Dan Scripps. I'll read his little bio here. Appointed to the commission in February 2019 and designated as chair in July 2020, Chair Scripps previously practiced energy law in Washington, D.C. and is a former member of the Michigan House of Representatives. So you have like a professional politician here.
That's why we remember his name,
Mm-hmm.
too. He was in House of Representatives. And this is kind of my point of name recognition.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
You're like, oh yeah,
It's just,
he did stuff.
He did stuff.
Don't remember anything bad about him.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. The second is Commissioner Catherine Peritic. Appointed to the commission on January 4, 2021, Commissioner Peritic, previously worked in both the public and the private sectors, primarily in energy storage project development and as a renewable energy technology engineer. I think that sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
The third is Commissioner Alessandra Carrion. Appointed to the commission on July 23, 2023, Commissioner Carreon has a background in regulatory compliance and transportation sustainability, including leading efforts around equitable fleet electrification and accessible EV charging infrastructure. Right,
Yeah.
so all these look good on paper, but
Well, they do. And honestly,
But
and I
really
guess
do.
that's my point, though. Like, it's kind of nice that we don't have to vote for Michigan Public Service Commission. How are we supposed to be able to do that? But then it leaves us very, like, vulnerable to their decision-making process. And something I've really learned in organizing is herd mentality is very real.
it's so real.
It's so real. And as soon
creepy.
as you start working in these settings, right, you turn into a politician. You start to kind of think the way that other people do. You start like understanding the process.
You're like afraid
and
to
you,
make a bad name for yourself.
well, and you
'cause
gain
it's so
empathy
public.
for
Yeah.
people's positions. Like, I know you have a tough decision to make.
Yeah.
And like that becomes the empathy versus like the person's house that is now impacted by this decision made.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the priorities shift a little bit.
Yeah. So it's this, to me, a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
If I were able to vote, would I even know who to vote or appoint in that sense?
That's true.
And then because I'm not able to vote, I don't have a say in all of these decisions that are being made for me.
Yeah.
So it's a tough one for me.
Yeah. I feel kind of the same. Like I feel a lot of conflicted about everything that I've been learning about them. Like, and the 6-year terms is like, in a way, it's like it's good when we have good people appointed, but it can be really bad if we have bad people appointed.
Absolutely.
You know, I don't know enough about our commissioners and their history right this second. I would consider them moderate just based on the work that we've been doing and how we've been interacted in the past. But, you know, for all we know, we could have somebody that's like dead set on opening coal plants all over Michigan or something like that, you know?
Well, and they did approve Enbridge's proposed tunnel project. So, like, for what?
Yeah.
Like, genuinely, when I think about what the Clean Energy and Jobs Act is supposed to be about, it is literally saying we're going to transition away from fossil fuels.
Yeah.
All while saying, yes, you can go ahead and put another tunnel in so that you can continue to move this oil from point A to point B.
It's gross.
So is that transition? Is that clean energy? Like, where does that fit? You know, they're the same people who carved out an incinerator into a clean energy plan, calling it waste to energy.
That's true.
You know, so I have a really hard time with this. And I think I automatically go into these rooms with this disdain of like, you did this to us.
Yeah.
And who are you looking to benefit? What is good relative when we're talking about raising everybody's energy rates? Nobody wants to pay any more for the energy they have.
Yeah,
no
and
matter
also
if
like
you
why
can
isn't
afford
there
it
a
or
cap
not.
as to how much that you can get into from having like a basic service needed for life in this century? You know?
So I think good is a relative term. I'm glad you said like good or bad. Like, I think that's relative. I think that depends on the person that is literally like the perspective that they have.
Yeah, and I guess we're all people and we're mixed, etc.
But like higher energy rates, never great.
No. Especially when we just think about like their backgrounds that we just heard about. Like a lot of them sound like you would be like, oh yeah, like they should be done with some of this stuff.
Maybe that's what Gretchen thought.
No, I mean, damn Gretchen.
And I'm not shitting all over them right now. You know,
No.
I'm sure that
We're
there's
just trying to be very candid though about the facts of like, yeah,
Yeah.
like they might be great people. I mean, I feel like Dan Scripps had like a great talking voice while, you know, like he was easy to listen to.
Yeah, he was. He smiled. He responded well to people.
Yeah,
Totally.
he was friendly. Like as a person, these are probably like phenomenal people. But when it comes to like the service that they're providing to the public, I feel like I think it's just for us to like, or like fair for us to feel like sometimes they maybe give a little bit too much leeway to utilities as opposed to residents, you know?
We have 3 people making decisions on behalf of every resident
state, and
in
that's
Michigan.
wild.
And, you know, I'm going to keep bringing it back. Like 27,000 comments were made about the Enbridge proposed tunnel and they still approved it.
Yeah.
So my question would be then, for people who show up, for people who understand what they're doing, they make a lot of noise, and they still don't have to listen to that.
Yes. Oh, that's one thing that I learned too. So they actually, if you make what they call like an unofficial or just like public comment that you're not explicitly putting in the record, they are not legally bound, and that actually I don't think it's even bound. I think they're not legally allowed to use that in their deliberations when making a decision about something.
So people saying stuff to them outside of this is now have to be negated if they're not in the room.
It kind of just doesn't exist because it's not submitted in a legal document form. Like you actually almost like need for real like a lawyer or some kind of like formal intervention, kind of like what Sergio is doing, to actually be able to legally put in the cases like a record of this was said, this was made known to you, and this is part of the case. Otherwise, those documents can't legally be used for a case.
And the average person does not have access to that information, nor do they have access to lawyers and documents and in time and energy to be able to do that.
Exactly.
So what do you think we can do? And we don't have to stop the conversation here, but I'm curious, like, what do you think we can do for people? Because, like, now that we have, like, a general understanding, now we understand.
This is very general. I would like to bring, like, an expert on at some point. But this is, like, your MPSC 101.
Well, but we have a general understanding. We have an actual experience with them, right? We have an experience with, like, the things that they've done in the past and then, like, how they operate as of yesterday. What would you suggest people can do, right? Like, what do you think could make this a system that works for us instead of against us?
Yeah.
And if, it's okay if you don't have this answer, but like, you know, I want to have a thought conversation about this. Like, I want us to not just leave this with like this frustrated feeling. Cause I did leave yesterday kind of feeling like like when you go to a place and you thought you were going to get fed and they had like they hardly had
desserts.
a light appetizer. They hardly had an appetizer, or they had only desserts.
Yeah.
They had your least favorite, absolutely like something you will not eat.
Yeah. Yeah, it's rough. I think our main point would be to kind of seek aid or support or collaboration with an organization that's already doing some of that work. So, for example, as I mentioned like a bit ago, like Sergio is doing some of this like legal, like intervention, like advocacy work, right? Which is kind of out of our scope, like Erica and I scope. But there's other groups, like for example, like MEJC in Detroit, are kind of the main ones that I'm really aware of. But really just getting with a nonprofit or maybe getting like a collective together of people that can maybe, for example, like this, I think in our last one-on-one conversation that you guys heard, we talked a lot about the Roosevelt Park neighborhood and the truck traffic and stuff, right? What if, not necessarily just advocates like us, but what if like all the residents got together and pooled their resources together to get a lawyer and have that legal representation and submit comment and evidence, because you have to have evidence to make a lot of these cases, to like influence a lot of these cases. There's like a whole formal proceeding that has to happen, and it's hard to do it as a layperson. Like you really just need like that expert. So I would say don't try to do it alone. Either find a squad or build a squad.
There are organizations who are working on accountability, who are working on combating some of the decisions made. And to your point, Nancy, you can join these already formed organizations, or you can attempt to do something a little bit more like hyper local or focused on your specific needs and wants. It's not always going to work, but it is better than just sitting back and being angry, you know, that they're not listening to your individual opinion or, you know, your experience living around these utilities.
Yeah. I will say don't get discouraged if you do start something like this. We know that Consumers Energy and DTE, obviously they have like unlimited amounts of money because they are providing a basic service. So they do have like a whole squad of lawyers themselves, which is I think why it's important for us to also kind of like lawyer up, you know?
Yeah.
And obviously they're all, the whole point of them lobbying and lawyering is to keep increasing their profits. And I feel like it's important for the people to hear, or, you know, these commissioners to hear that there's other interests to protect.
There is, absolutely. Yeah, and I think this just gives insight to the fact that there are regulations. And I think if more people knew that,
Yeah.
then they would attempt to do something about like the lack of accountability within those regulations.
Yeah. I have an easy action item.
Yeah, let's do it.
If you do want to learn more, you can listen to the YouTube video that I mentioned earlier, which is called Public Utility Commissions 101. And in it, the speaker, Tanya Pazlowski, with Midwest BDC, which stands for Building Decarbonization, if you need to know. They kind of just really go over like all the ins and outs of not just what the public service... my brain's like... I'm so done with this acronym. Not just like PSCs do, but also like not just in Michigan, but they cover like other states too.
Yeah.
And not just like what they are and what they do, but also how to engage with them.
Yeah.
So it's just like a really, really great, probably like an hour-ish webinar. Highly recommended. They tell you all the details. It's
well, this
juicy.
is where some of like
Juicy.
the bits. This is from like where some of the bits that we're talking about you would get more in depth, right?
Yes. Yeah. So that's like 102 or
yeah.
101.
We're like a side quest.
Yeah.
We're like
Where you get a little bit more context to the story on the main storyline.
You're like, what?
Oh.
We're the reason why you might look something like this up.
Yeah, exactly.
Because what the hell is a Michigan Public Service Commission?
Yeah. This is square one. It's up to you to go to square two.
Yeah. Well, and it's up to us to have an understanding, because we can't just be frustrated that DTE and consumers keep rising our rates. We can't be frustrated about fossil fuels. We have to understand who's allowing the behavior. And then, learn how to use our voices around that.
Yeah.
So, call to action. Go ahead and study a little bit more. And my call to action would be either to tune into these meetings. They have, they're all accessible virtually. You can make a comment virtually. Something that's like didn't sit well with me is not seeing that room filled.
Yeah.
And so now use every opportunity you can to show up.
Yeah.
And
Engage.
I think we can probably be better about sharing that on social media if they come around to Grand Rapids or something like that.
So true.
So, stay engaged, stay informed,
Learn more acronyms.
and stay away from DT and Consumers Energy.
People can't help it.
No, they can't actually. They keep trying to fund a lot of the work that we do.
Try as a keyword.